Hello again, friends. I wanted to do something a little bit different today. I wanted to go over 9 manga cards and 1 anime card and explain how their effects changed and whether or not I think that had the card released during the same time frame as other cards that were released from the manga at that time, whether or not their original effects would have been broken or whether they would have been balanced or whether they would have been too weak, as we have with the first card. So the first card is actually a card that got buffed from its manga incarnation, and that was Perfect Raizer. So this original Perfect Raizer cannot boost, and it doesn't get a bonus critical, and it's 9,000 base power. So the upgraded Perfect Raizer that we ended up getting actually says if you don't have another Raizer, then it loses 2,000 power, so that would bring it back down to that 9,000 base power. But it is 11k static when you do have that other Raizer out. Additionally, it says during your turn, if the number of cards with Raizer in your soul is 4 or more, it gets a bonus critical, which made it way stronger. So had we gotten the original Raizer instead of the upgraded Perfect Raizer that we did get, it would have been Dookie. The Perfect Raizer that we got was also Dookie, but it did eventually get more support cards when we got more cards that had Raizer in the card name. And once we did get those extra Raizers, it did get a lot more viable, although it still was never really a top tier deck because it wasn't even that strong to begin with. So moving on to the next card, we have Raizer Custom. The only difference between the Raizer Custom that we got and the manga version of Raizer Custom is that this card was a static 12k on your opponent's turn. So the 6,000 power that it got, it kept the entire time. And honestly, I think if it had been printed like this, it would have been perfectly fine. The Raizer Custom that we got honestly feels incredibly sad to play. It's basically supposed to be a 12k attacking beat stick, which for a grade 1 is not necessarily bad, but compared to the other cards that you'd want to use, it's not great either. And also, grade 1 beat sticks, generally speaking, can be boosted. If you boost it with the Battle Raizer, sure, it'll get an extra 6,000 power and swing for 18k, and that's cute. But then you have to shuffle the Battle Raizer back, and then Raizer Custom is just kind of useless. One thing that you could do is put the Battle Raizer up front and then swing for 15, with this being the booster, but, I mean, meh. So all in all, the fact that this has no synergy as a back row Raizer unit for the other Raizers that you want to play just kind of made this card lackluster, and I don't think that it would have been remotely strong even if it had that static 12k defense. Moving on, we had Blood Sacrifice Ruthven. So I kind of tried to order these from weakest to strongest, and this is one where I'm not sure if I'm correct in saying that this is the next weakest one. So, I started off with very weak or inconsequential. This one is actually a good card. Had this been released in Comic Style Volume 1, and had we gotten Vroukalakas, I honestly think that those two cards would have been an absolute menace, and I do think that this card would have been strong. That being said, well, I guess I should read what the card does first. It says, choose a card from your hand and discard it. When this unit is placed on rearguard circle, you may pay the cost. If you do, choose a card from your drop zone and put it into your damage zone. Choose a card from your damage zone and put it into your hand. So this is excellent filtration. You can choose any card from your drop zone or any card from your damage zone and add it to your hand. So anytime that you miss something, this gives you the ability to bring it back. And if you use any cards that Soul Blast, such as their imprisoned angel, Sarakiel? It has to Soul Blast 3 to lose restraint. If you do anything that Soul Blasts, that also means that if you Soul Charge something that you need, you have outs to get it. This card would have been absolutely incredible. The fact that it's this early in the list means that the other cards are just stupid. So, but what we ended up getting for Blood Sacrifice Ruthven was this effect. Choose a card from your hand and discard it. When it's placed on rear guard, if you have 4 or more soul, you can pay the cost. If you do, draw a card, soul charge 1. This card would have been solid, very solid, had we got it during Comic Style Volume 1. It would honestly have been a very, very good card. That being said, by the time we got it, this effect was not that strong, and I do feel like it was a little bit of a letdown for us to have gotten it in the way that we got it. So, obviously, the actual card that we got, not great. Had we gotten this card instead, it would have been good. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it would have been broken, though, because it doesn't procure that much advantage. It's just kind of up in the middle a little bit. The next card is Golden Beast Tamer, which, honestly, if I'm being honest, I think this should have been before Blood Sacrifice Ruthven. Either way, the only difference between the Golden Beast Tamer that we got and the manga version is this one says, call a chimera from your soul to rearguard, whereas this one is call a chimera from your deck. Obviously, deck searching is always better. and this would have been a much stronger overall card just in virtue of that. But I don't feel like searching your deck for a Chimera is that big of a problem, and I think that with its restraint, being Soul Blast 3 to lose restraint, and how necessary it is to maintain your Soul and Pale Moon, and how they didn't have that many soul charging options, I think that this would have been entirely fairly balanced if it did just search your deck for that Chimera, and you just got the +1 that way. Moving on, we have Arcsaver Dragon. The only difference between manga Arcsaver Dragon and Arcsaver Dragon that we ended up getting was that it was 15,000 power. Now, if we assume that we got this at around the same time as Dragonic Nouvelle Vague, I don't think Arcsaver Dragon would have been that broken. As a matter of fact, I think Vague is still stronger than this incarnation. Had it been 15,000 power instead of 13,000 power, I'm not sure. It's really difficult for me to ascertain just how much stronger that extra 2,000 defense would have been at that particular time. Given that this was break rides and just a few short sets, it would have been Legion. I'm not convinced it would have been that problematic to have a 15,000 base power Arcsaver Dragon, especially since this is a grade 4, and the consistency in riding is going to be a little bit wonkier in Royal Paladin unless it got its own version of Nouvelle Roman Dragon and was able to fix the riding ratios. Because there's so many extra cards that would have been needed, because there's so much unknown about that, it's a little bit hard to ascertain, but I do think 15,000 static defense would have been pretty strong, especially since nothing would have interfered with that, and I assume it still would have had the restriction where it couldn't be called to Rearguard Circle. So all in all, I think that one would be kind of fair, but still a little bit strong. The next strongest card, I think, would have been High-Powered Raizer Custom. High-Powered Raizer Custom is 5,000 base power in the manga, so that means that if you do not have Battle Raizer in its row, it is the most worthless piece of garbage ever. However, given that Battle Raizer is a starter and you choose where it goes, this card would have been 16,000 static power on both turns. I think that that actually has quite a bit more potential if you just leave Battle Raizer behind the Vanguard and just have this be a 16k attacking grade 2 Vanguard. I think that that actually has some potential to work, and I think that that would be relatively strong. The only difference between, point A and point B here is that high-powered Raizer Custom that we got was only 16k on your turn and not on your opponent's turn. I think that this would have actually been legitimately pretty strong, and it would have been fun to make decks around that. Obviously, many decks can get around that. Anything that can retire back row would be able to get rid of the Battle Raizer, and then you would have just lost all of that power, and then you would have been sitting on pretty flimsy defense. And not only that, you have to sacrifice Twin Drive in order to have the 16,000 power. So all in all, I think that would have been perfectly balanced, if not a little bit strong, but I think it would have been reasonable, even for this time frame. Next up, we have Vroukalakas. Vroukalakas would have been crazy, especially in conjunction with Ruthven. So Vroukalakas, when it moves to Soul, then your Vanguard gets 3,000 power and +1 critical. And given that Dark Irregulars had a bunch of units that would be able to make good use of that, that's pretty strong. Especially cards like Amon that you could choose to move it to Soul from the board with. So this would have given Dark Irregulars quite a bit of extra steam, in my opinion, and I think that that would have been probably a little bit too strong. Especially since when you place it on Rearguard, the next turn it just moves itself to Soul. I don't know if that's at the start of the turn before the ride phase or at the start of the main phase after you ride. If it is after you ride, that's crazy. If it's before you ride, then that means that if you do ride your Vanguard, then you would lose the effect, so that may be weaker. All in all, though, this card does look pretty nutso, especially if you Soul Blast it out with any effect, and then you bring it back to your hand with Ruthven, and then you do it again. So all in all, Vroukalakas is very, very strong. And then what we ended up getting is choose 2 Vroukalakas on Rearguard, put them to Soul. At the beginning of your main phase, you may pay the cost. If you do choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets plus 3,000 power, +1 critical until end of turn. And we got it all the way in G set 8. That's way too late to be getting a card like this. If we had gotten this in Comic Style Volume 1, this may have been fun to play around with. But even then, all it takes is a back row retirement hitting one of them on your opponent's turn, and they can play around it. So I don't think this would have been all that strong at any point in time, whereas the original one would have obviously been nutty. So we could have gotten this back in Comic Style Volume 1, and I think it would have fit the theme and been just wonky enough to match the rest of the set. Moving on, we have the Dark Dictator. Holy crap, this card was stupid in the manga. So this card is obviously meant to mirror Alfred. So your units cannot boost this unit is one of the effects. During your turn, this unit gets 2,000 power for each of your Shadow Paladin rear guards, so much like Alfred's first two effects. Its secondary effect, though, is when it's placed on Vanguard, you can Soul Blast 3 to give your front row 5,000 power until end of turn, while not counting itself. So you can give your two front row rear guards 5,000 power. So this has the downside where if your opponent is able to keep your board in the front cleared, then you can't get that effect off. So that could be a little bit of a minus. However, it still wasn't a terrible card, and it kind of had a little bit of a mix of Soul Saver and Alfred all in one. But the manga effect, holy crap. So it doesn't say that it can't be boosted. Let's just assume that it can't for the sake of argument. Either way, this card is nuts. So it gets 2,000 power for each of your Shadow Paladin rearguards, just like Alfred. But also, all of your Shadow Paladin rearguards in the front row as a continuous effect during your turn get 5,000 power with this. So that means that it's Soul Saver all the time. And that would have been absolutely insane if this card, when it was released as a promo, had this effect. That's just crazy. And then moving on, we're going to get to the top two for the most broken ones, at least of the ones I'm reviewing today. So this was an anime exclusive card, Oracle Guardian Hermes. Its effect, based off of what we can tell, is when it's placed as rear guard, your opponent reveals their hand until end of turn. Then your opponent reveals the top card of his or her deck, and you can choose to put that card on the top or bottom of their deck. So not only do you know whether or not your opponent is going to hit a trigger, well, sort of. If they are going to hit a trigger, you can move the trigger to the bottom of the deck, and it doesn't state that the next card is revealed. I don't remember if it is or not. But if that card is gone, then it's safe to say that they're not very likely to hit a trigger because you just moved a trigger to the bottom of their deck. So this can be used especially to get rid of any potential for a 6 damage heal. And that's pretty good. Also, being able to see everything in your opponent's hand means that you know exactly how much guard they have and whether or not they can stop particular attack patterns that you have. And you can know whether or not you should push in or whether or not you should leave a little bit reserved in order to make it to the next turn. Would this card be broken if it were printed in Vanguard at all in any capacity for any format? I mean, I think that one of the skills of Vanguard is keeping track of your opponent's drive checks and knowing roughly what cards are in their hand. And I do think that that's not particularly difficult. And generally speaking, by turn 5, 6, 7, you should know just about every single card in your opponent's hand, other than their last card that they drew for turn, for the most part, unless they have an enormous hand size. So generally speaking, I don't think this card is as advantageous as you might think it would be, but it would still be absolutely nutty. And it would also take any and all of the skill of remembering what your opponent's hand was out of the game. But that being said, would I want to waste a spot in my deck for this card when I could have a rearguard that has an effect that's actually going to end the game? Maybe, maybe not. It really depends on how much you value the ability to remove that trigger from the top of your opponent's deck, or to know that your opponent doesn't have a trigger. But I do feel like in the majority of cases, this card is going to end up just doing nothing. That being said, I still think that the premise of the card is too strong, and it's understandable that this is the one and only card that Bushiroad has never created that was showcased in the anime. And then following it up, we're going to have the most broken card in the manga, the dumbest card possible, and that is Promise Daughter. So the Promise Daughter that we got is discard an Oracle Think Tank from your hand. It gets 5,000 power until end of battle when it attacks. Okay, that's cool. That's neat. This is what it did in the manga. Look at the top card of your deck. Put that card on the top or bottom of your... put that card back on top of your deck or into your drop zone. Repeat until you don't put a card in your drop zone. So literally just, is that a trigger? Nope. Is that a trigger? Nope. Is that a trigger? Nope. And imagine this card with an over trigger. Holy crap. But even then, you could use this to guarantee that you're going to get a heal trigger out of your deck, or you could use it to guarantee a critical, or if you're running 2 stands, you could use it to guarantee that you get a stand at 5 damage. There's so much ridiculous stupidity with this. It is the dumbest card ever thought of, ever conceived. It might as well just be pick a card from your deck, put it on top of your deck. It's that dumb. Anyway, I think that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one.